Night Church. Jonty here, and with me we have a fantastic special guest. We have Grant Bickerton. Thank you so much for joining me, Grant.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonty. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So I just wondered if you wanted to introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. Yep, so I work with a mission organisation called Power to Change, and that's in a whole lot of different countries around the world. But my role is specifically working here from the headquarters in Melbourne. I've been actually working with them for, over 20 years. And I've had an interest in overseas work as well as actual local work on university campuses. And now, actually, after going back and doing some extra research related to psychological factors and spiritual factors that promote well-being amongst Christian workers, my focus is spent probably 2/3 of my time trying to work with our missionaries and other people in full-time Christian ministry about how to be psychologically healthy and spiritually healthy in trying to serve Jesus for the longer term. Yeah.
That's really awesome. And I guess I'm old enough that I remember you being around at Turramurra Uniting, but a lot of us at Night Church may not be. Can you just explain your connection to Turramurra as well?
Yeah, well, I would definitely say that, to be honest, for me, Turramurra Uniting Church is my home Christian family. Even though we haven't been there for a number of years, it still is. Just the partnership in the gospel that I've had with Turramurra Uniting Church for so long is really still, for me, I feel like it's my family. So, it's great to be able to be involved today, I must say. But even more specifically, my family started going to Turramurra Uniting Church back in 1982. I became a Christian there in my late teenage years. Thanks to the influence of people like your dad, Jonty, actually, and other youth leaders. So significant in my life has been Turramurra Uniting Church. It really has been like a family for me, I must say. And so, it's I can't speak highly enough. Yeah.
Well, amazing that we can have you back at Turramurra again. To frame what we're talking about tonight, talking about self-care and I guess the mental health side of living as a Christian. I'm really excited to get into some of this with you, particularly with your background, not only with psychology, but also with the Christian Church and Turramurra Uniting Church as well. I was doing some research before just to kind of put my head around what we were talking about, and I came across two facts on Blue. One, half of all mental health conditions we experience at some point in our lives will have started by age 14, and over 75% of mental health problems occur before age 25. So very clearly, mental health is something, and that side of living is something that begins at a very young age. So how do you think, I guess, as a society, but also as a church, how do you think we are at talking about that sort of thing, particularly with young people?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you quoted those statistics. Age of onset and mental health issues really depends upon the particular issue you're talking about. But across our whole lifespan in Australia, 1 in 2 people across our lifespan could meet diagnosis for one of the commonly occurring mental health conditions. So what that means is actually mental health issues are actually just really, really common, really, really common. Yet still, I think in our society, there is a bit of a stigma about it for whatever reason. And so how do we go talking about it? Well, I think we're talking about it more and we're trying to destigmatize it, but I still think there is a bit of a stigma about it. Mental health issues is not like a disease you catch. It's not like there's a pathogen and I catch social anxiety. No, actually, most of the actual types of mental health issues is really better thought of as like a continuum. And we all can kind of fluctuate up and down on that continuum. The continuum might go from really good health, mental health, all the way down to actual quite a debilitating experience. But actually we can all fluctuate on that continuum. You might think about like depression. And that goes from feeling okay down to feeling a bit blue, feeling sad, all the way down to really significant impairment times. But you know, we're always kind of fluctuating up and down on those continuums in a whole lot of different areas of life. So I would just say it's really important to talk openly about that, because we all do fluctuate. And some of those issues, it's not even like they're bad. It's natural and good, actually. If I lose a loved one, I'm going to be sad. My mental health continuum is going to fluctuate. Is that a problem? No. Actually, these types of emotions and sometimes even these reactions is the ways God's designed us to pull back and reflect and think about, you know, that emotional state is telling me something significant's going on. And I need to kind of process, and I need to have some reduced energy, so I'm not going to just keep on going as normal. There's a functional element to many of these things. Problems occur when we get stuck. Now that's where we need to actually have appropriate conversation. All I'm trying to say is that there is a stigma, and sometimes I think it is like, oh no, it's like a label I can get stuck with. That's not really quite like what mental health is. There's a continuum. Somewhere on the continuum, the psychiatric and psychological professions have put a line in the sand and said, you know, on that side, we'll call that blank, major depressive disorder or whatever. Well, what if you're just on that side of the line? Does it not matter?
Yeah.
Of course not. So sometimes labels are stigmatizing in an unhelpful way. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, and then you throw the COVID-19 pandemic on top of all of this. How do you even begin to measure the effect that has had on people and their mental health?
Yeah. Well, so that's really, really important. Think fluctuation the whole time, because I think for many of us, what the experience of this COVID situation is it causes massive changes in our lives. Massive changes. Now, the thing with change, even positive change, is that there's going to be some sense of loss in a change, even when there's positive changes. So for some people, actually, what this kind of COVID time has brought about is maybe some positive changes. You know, maybe there's fresh opportunities for particularly young people to get involved in serving in church and to share ideas about how we can do more things online. And well, maybe that wouldn't have been as pressing a need 18 months ago. So there can be actually some positives to the change, but for others, change is going to result in feelings of loss. And I think that is a big issue. So whenever we have such widespread changes that we've been going through, we can experience loss, and those losses can be in a variety of realms. Some people might be feeling, with the whole COVID experience, a sense of loss of safety. Maybe I don't feel as safe as I once did, particularly if you're in a vulnerable population. Maybe I've lost a sense of feeling safe in my environment or secure in my environment. Maybe I'm not sure whether I'll exit physically okay, or maybe I'm not sure I'll exit emotionally okay. Maybe there's a loss of safety there. Or maybe I'm not sure I'll exit this COVID period financially okay. So COVID can actually cause a loss in many different ways. One way is a loss of security or safety. Of course, there's loss of relationships that we've experienced. Now maybe it's not so much, well, I've lost the relationship, but there's been a change in the relationship. I no longer communicate the way I used to with person X. And so that's kind of changed. Sometimes there's loss to do with relationships. For others of us, there can be a sense of loss of competence. You know, maybe I've been used to studying in a certain way, and all of a sudden, like, study is different, or work is different, and I don't feel as competent trying to do what I'm meant to be doing in this new environment. And for some people, then it's also, there's a loss of purpose or sense of what I should be doing. Maybe people in ministry, for example, this is what I should be doing, but all of a sudden we can't meet together. Where's my purpose?
Yeah.
And so all of those, so with COVID, there's been change. Change brings loss. And you know what? When there's loss, there's grief. And so there's a sense of grief that can come or can sneak up on us. And the thing with all of that stuff is that results in stress. Even positive changes causes stress. And so when our stress levels rise, that's going to make us more vulnerable to mental health fluctuations. You can imagine stress is kind of working like this. It's like a scale of 1 to 10. Usually through our day, we fluctuate up and down on that scale. But usually we probably fluctuate between, say, 2 and 6 out of 10 on the stress level. And so what that means is if you're kind of traveling around a 4 or a 3 and someone, bumps into you as you're driving, that's going to cause a spike in your stress level. Yeah. But let's say that spike might be maybe 3 or 4 points. If you're at 3, that's only going to get you to a 7. What happens in COVID or any kind of major change situation like this is all of our stress levels are like uniformly up another 5 points. We're not kind of averaging around 2 to 5. We're now averaging around 7 and 8. And so if something little comes in, my family member says that to me, or I get asked to do that, or I get a letter and all of a sudden, I kind of lose it quicker because I'm already running hot, my stress levels. Those increased stress levels precipitate more mental health fluctuations. And so we're just a little more vulnerable because we're all running hotter. And so we feel more tired, more exhausted, and more reactive, be it to hopeless or anxious or whatever.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess the hardest part then, and this is certainly true in my experience, the hardest part then is often starting the conversation about getting help when you're in those spaces. It's not the conversations themselves, it's literally asking for help or whatever that first step is. So I guess, do you have any advice or strategies when you're in that space and you're not quite sure what to do, how to take that first step in looking after yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say talk to someone. Talk to someone who you trust, one, and then actually make sure you access the right help from the right person. That's really important. In the Australian healthcare system, the right person, the right health professional to go to first is your GP. They're the ones who make the referral. But I would say it's important to talk to someone and then ask for some assistance to access the right help from the right person. Let me just say that again. The right help from the right person. God's made us complicated beings. I'm a physical being. I'm an emotional, psychological being. I'm a spiritual being. And actually the Bible speaks about humans from each of those different lenses. Now, that doesn't mean that we're 3 parts. No, we're one. But it's almost like you can look at issues from different perspectives like that. Now, what that means is when there's a problem, we probably need to make sure we're getting the right help from the right person for the right issue. Let me give you an example. Let's say it's like churches back in person, and I'm walking out of Turramurra Uniting, and I slip on the, I slip in the kind of foyer area, walking up the stairs, and I break my leg. You know, what kind of a problem is that? It's a physical problem. So I want you to call an ambulance, not call my minister in Melbourne, you know. So clearly, I need my leg to be set, you know. I need to go to the right person to get that done. So I've broken my leg. So it's a physical problem. Would you say it's a psychological problem, Jonty? Would you say it's a psychological problem?
Definitely an element of psychology.
Exactly. So it might be. If I was coming to play in like a grand final, coming to final season in footy, you know, if I was scheduled to play in a team that was going to play in a grand final and I break my leg at Turramurra Uniting, that's going to cause some fluctuations in my mental health, let me tell you. So clearly that's a physical issue, but it might cause some actual other issues to do with loss or something like that, or a slide in my mood, that I might need to access some different help. Is it a theological issue? Well, again, maybe not. Maybe it might cause me to ask questions of why did God let this happen to me? And so maybe I might need to speak to Phil or to a leader to address that issue. It's important to make sure we're getting the right help from the right person according to the issue it is. So with mental health stuff, it is important, I would say, to access the right type of help. And the first point of call is going to be your GP. And they will refer you then onto the right professional from there. Yeah.
Cool. I think the other side of it, and I think an experience that is probably universal to everyone, is at some point in your life, you'll have a friend or a family member who, it might not be you in that situation, but a friend or a family member is going through a rough patch. And often that's really hard too, knowing the right thing to do, how to start those conversations, when to give space, when to offer help. So I guess, do you have any advice on that side of it, of how supportive?
Yeah, I would say bring it up. No matter what it is, bring it up. And so people who care for me, the best thing they can say to me is, you know, Grant, I've noticed you don't quite seem to be yourself. Like you're avoiding eye contact, or you just seem more lethargic or down. How are you going? That's really important, to bring things up. Often we can be a little bit nervous about asking things, like I don't want to make it worse. That's not going to make it worse. It's going to make it better. Bring it up. I'm not saying, you know, I'm going to be totally right, but just bringing it up shows I care. And then trying to offer them to be someone whom actually that you're available to help them access the right help, is what I'd say. Yeah. We want to avoid becoming someone's, therapist or something like that. Really what we need to do is we need to offer unconditional love, empathy, and be genuine about what's going on inside of us as well. But you want to avoid becoming, you know, someone's sole support. That's actually not going to be loving in the long term. So bring it up, and then think about, how can I help you? Take your hand and put it in the hand of someone who actually can help you address these issues. And I'm going to be here as your support, as a support.
Yeah. So I guess one of the biggest mistakes that people, particularly young people, can make is feeling like it's up to you to fix this.
Yeah.
And feeling like you need to take on that responsibility.
Yeah.
I absolutely resonate with what you're saying about be there as support to help them to get the help that they need. Yeah.
And sometimes we can get stuck in that dynamic of people saying, oh, you know, Grant, I've told you this, but I don't want you to tell anyone else.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know what? I would say to that person, Fred, Martha, whoever, because I love you, I'm not gonna obey what you just said. If I didn't love you, I would keep this quiet. But because I love you, I'm going to take action now. Now, long term, that's actually going to be helpful. Yeah. And so same with more serious things like, people intending to harm themselves and all that kind of stuff, or harm someone else. Definitely, there can be some manipulation in that. And, I don't want you to tell anyone. You know what? If I love you, I want to do something here. Yeah. And so I will say that because I love you, man, I'm going to pick up the phone now and we're going to call blank someone. Yeah.
And it's not a situation of, I have to tell everyone about this. It's a situation of, if you're not safe, if I'm worried about you, I have to tell someone that will help you. It's entirely about loving that person and wanting the best for them. Yeah. Which I think when you're in the other situation, it can sometimes feel like a betrayal when that gets told. I trusted you with this, but it's not. It's all about safety and looking after that person.
Yeah, you nailed it, Jonty. And just letting them know that is important. Yeah. So I just let them know that. They're going to be angry. If they're angry, that's okay.
Yeah. Them being angry is the least of your worries at that point. Yeah. So let's move on. There's another thing that I came across when I was doing a little bit of research is I was quite frankly kind of shocked by there are some really unhelpful Christian stereotypes which often actually turn into expectations as Christians that are actually really unhelpful around mental health. So the main one that I came across in various different forms was this idea that if you're a true Christian, you shouldn't be feeling depressed, for example. I guess, what's your take on that? What would your response be to ideas like that?
Yeah. So again, I would just say that's an erroneous viewpoint about what is depression. And we're back to the fluctuations. It's appropriate to feel low mood in situations. Now, the difficulty comes when I get stuck down there, but that's not necessarily a spiritual issue. Again, going back to those examples before. More than that, I would just say the Bible itself is full of people struggling with many, 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 many things. There's a number of people in the Bible who ask God to die. I'm so upset now, I want to die. The book of Psalms, the majority of the types of Psalms are Psalms of lament. Incredibly powerful times. Suffering in the biblical perspective is actually not, is definitely not necessarily evidence that God is not loving me. No, he wants to be present with us. Read the letters to the 7 churches in the Revelation. People really suffering, and Jesus is present with them there. Jesus himself is described as a man of sorrows who was well acquainted with suffering. The Apostle Paul, many times in 2 Corinthians, you read that book of 2 Corinthians, and he talks about feeling like he's being crushed under what he's been experiencing. Elijah, Job, talked about Psalms. Actually, these kinds of issues are not evidences or indications that there's something necessarily wrong with my spiritual life. No, actually, I think when Jesus talks in John 9, it is where some people come to, where Jesus sees this man who was born blind, and people come to him, they say, well, who sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? And Jesus says, neither. But actually that this may bring glory, actually. Jesus then intervenes in the situation. Paul talks about having this idea of a thorn in his flesh. 3 times, whatever it is, 3 times he prayed, would you take it away, Father, please? And the Father's response was, my grace is sufficient for you. because my power is made perfect in your weakness. So I would say that is just not true, actually. It's just not true. It's just not biblically true. There's something in our Western culture that equates comfort and ease with a good life or God's plan for me. And God is a loving God. He does want our good. But he desires maturity in us. Maturity emotionally, spiritually, physically, like growth. And trials and difficulties, they can be like gymnasiums that strengthen us over time. Again, many of the great Christian leaders throughout church history had very major, significant struggles with mental health. Charles Spurgeon, Martin Luther himself. We could go on, but I would say beware of this simple equation. It's just not true. It's just not true.
And I guess I think of Jesus the night before his execution and his outward expression of the just grief and sorrow that he's experiencing. And I think to look at that and also say for us that those experiences and those feelings are not reflective of a true Christian lifestyle. I think it just doesn't.
Now the issue is when we're feeling that way, our thinking tends to become distorted as well. Now that's really important. So with Elijah, for example, when he had his kind of breakdown, he went off into the desert. He said, "I want to die," and what happens is he's fed, he's replenished physically, and then he goes and then he meets Yahweh eventually after 40 days walk. Now, when he meets God, what God says is, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And what Elijah says actually is very distorted. There's elements of truth in what Elijah says, but when you read it, actually, it's not totally true. Elijah says, "I've totally failed. All the prophets have been killed and now they're trying to kill me too." Well, actually, that's not true, Elijah. You've just had this huge revival on Carmel. God has actually retained a number of prophets. He saved them anyway. Actually, his thinking is distorted. Now, what I'm trying to say, why that's important, is when we're feeling bad, our thinking can get distorted. And we need actually to help each other, and I need to help myself by kind of actually getting my head into God's worldview, not necessarily my kind of, Sydney 21st century worldview. Involving God in our story and involving the biblical worldview is really what we need to live out, rather than just my cultural conditioned ways of thinking. Romans 12:1-2 says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, I urge you in view of God's mercy to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." Then it says, "Do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world. Don't let your thinking be squashed in like everyone else, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, perfect, and pleasing will." There's something about us renewing our mind really carefully, particularly when we're struggling, particularly at times like this. How do we look at the world from God's perspective rather than just what, the Telegraph or news.com says? Be careful with our thinking. That's really important. And we can encourage each other like that.
Yeah, and I think that's where the power of, particularly in a church context, the power of community comes in as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We get that sense of it's not just us. It's not just what we experience here. We are part of something. Share those things with each other as well.
In fact, Jonty, studies in the psychology of religion have really shown there is many, many benefits about being a follower of Jesus or being a spiritual person in terms of one's mental health. We just have so many more accesses to good resources to help us cope with our mental health fluctuations. One being access to the community. Another being helping us have a sense of how we can see God's truth or meaning in what's going on. Another thing is actually just the reality that the living God is present with me. And so even though I am fearful about what's going on, I don't know what's going to happen with, this exam and what's going to happen now. And I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years' time with my work or whatever. But I have the living God who said to me, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we can say with confidence, says in Hebrews 13, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. I'm not denying the reality of the challenges I'm facing, but we're not alone. We have someone who loves us to the point where he would die on the cross. And he's promised to be present with us till the end of the age. So I'm just not alone in this, is what I mean. There's many very significant resources knowing God in a personal way provides in trying to manage our mental health, particularly at times of uncertainty like this.
Yeah. And we could talk for hours and hours about this. My head's already going on to what, the next hour of conversation here, but we should probably wrap it up relatively soon. Did you have any summarizing statements that you wanted to leave us with, or any last words? Particularly, like I said, we have a lot of younger people tuning in at night.
I really just encourage you to seek to keep being together and trying to follow Jesus together. I would just say that there is nothing more significant than encouraging each other to keep going. Now, I don't mean that in a Pollyanna way. No, I mean that in a real way. Being real and being open about my questions, not hiding them or pretending I don't have them. Being open about my disappointments, not pretending I don't have them. Trying to help each other with good information to address questions and issues. I think that's really important. But trying to stay committed together and traveling through as a cohort is really, really very helpful. You probably need a group. We need a group of 4 to keep going. I'd say that's a helpful model. Yeah.
Thank you so much for chatting to me. I hope, for me, even just talking to you, this has been fantastic. I hope, and I'm pretty certain that it will have been really helpful for the people watching and listening too. So thank you so much for joining me, Grant. Thank you, Jonty. And honestly, it's a privilege to be having some communication with Turramurra Uniting like this. That's great. Thanks. Yeah, and hopefully if some point in the near future, fingers crossed, when restrictions down in Melbourne ease up, that's happened. Who knows when that's going to happen, but we'd love to see you back at Turramurra again sometime soon, because, whenever I come up, I try to come. So, yeah. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much again.